Welcome back to News in Focus. Now, what happened yesterday begs the question, is the government of national unity working? We've seen already 3 bills that have disagreements between 2 GNU partners, the ANC and the Democratic Alliance. But as we heard Vali Okamp earlier on, this is the one that would really test the relationship between the DA and the ANC in terms of their partnership within the GNU, and also not forgetting the other partners within the governing coalition. But is this just how coalition governments works? Is this the way the coalitions from a global perspective is meant to work? Disagreements, sometimes even 11th hour decisions that need to be made. Joining me now for this discussion, I'd like to welcome from the Wits School of Governance and the Director of Research at the Mangubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, Professor Susan Booysen. Prof. Booysen, thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Good afternoon. Good to speak to you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure.
Yes, and in terms of just my MISTRA connection, I'm working on coalitions on a project for MISTRA, but I'm not the Director of Research anymore.
Okay.
But it's right on topic here.
Yes.
And coalitions is the research I do for them.
No, thank you so much for that heads up, Professor Booysen. Prof. Booysen, what we saw yesterday, I just want to get your initial reaction to what had actually happened, because this was away from the norm we would see in South Africa. Of course, we've seen in Parliament disgruntledness, even certain MPs being taken out. But the fact that there could not be consensus on a government budget, just your initial reaction to it.
Yes, it is really very severe if coalition partners do not have agreement on a budget, and a national budget in this case, because that kind of guaranteed majority that a coalition government brings, coalition agreements brings, is an essential part of stability of governance, and budget's essential part of this. The majority on a budget vote is really what sustains budgets, not just budgets, but also coalition governments over time. And if there's instability on that front, it can be very severe. But we know in South Africa there have been, in these few months of coalition government at national level again, a few disruptions or few upsets, I should say, but they weren't in the domain of budgets. And so this for me was immediately a signal that this is more serious, more severe than what we have had in the past. And when we heard more about the dynamics of what had been happening, that it was a last minute, by all reports, a last-minute insertion of a 2 percentage point hike in the VAT rate, and that had seemingly been sneaked in because the ANC people had not trusted that the other coalition party partners would keep this secret, and would also acknowledging that it goes against the wishes of coalition government partners. And so there was a big evidence of a big breakdown in trust. But then, as the cabinet in total agreed that the budget will not be presented, and we saw some initial reactions, very tentative from the ANC, but initial reactions that didn't throw the coalition out the door, because they cannot do it on their own. And there was immediate reaction from other opposition parties not in the coalition government that indicated either. ANC really knew that it was no-go to go ahead, to forge ahead with this budget. And so it's back to the drawing board. And perhaps this will help if the ANC takes these lessons on board. It could help strengthen our coalition in longer term. And the big lesson that I believe the ANC should be taking on board, something that they've been very reluctant to do, is that they are no longer the sole party in government. Maybe by some miracle it could happen again in future, but for the foreseeable future and definitely for the current term, they are not a majority partner.
Yeah.
And the ANC has been boasting on quite a few occasions that it is the ANC led, in some ways that is neutrally true as well, but the ANC led coalition government. But adding to that discourse that it's the ANC election manifesto that is being implemented, and that is not a favorable condition for a lasting coalition if the leading partner
Prof. Booysen,
indicates upfront.
Prof. Booysen, that's where I want to touch on, because for 30 years the ANC has been this governing party, and you well versed in governance. You understand governance to a point where it really is the understandable aspect that if the ANC right now cannot allow itself to have these partners, then it's putting themselves in a bit of a hole. But how difficult is it for them to really say, we are now in this marriage for the sake of the South African people? How do they structure themselves to say, this is us, we are now with this government of national unity, there are other political parties, it's time for us now not to close our ears, but to open it even more, especially when it comes to important aspects like the budget?
It will be such a welcome initiative and so graceful from the ANC should they take this moment of reflection and just step back and speak to the South African citizens, the electorate, the voters, and say, we may not always have been acting as if we are not the only party in government, but we recognize the importance of this coalition government. And they have been saying it's important. They have been boasting about the existence of this coalition government as a form of unity government, internationally, in financial markets, etc. But to step back and almost make a renewed pledge and say, we recognize the importance of this coalition. We will go do everything in our power moving forward to find policy consensus, to find consensus on important issues, and not spring budget surprises or policy or legislation signing surprises on their new coalition government partners.
Prof. Booysen, for the next 3 weeks up until March the 12th, I think every South African is going to be waiting quite anxiously to find out what this agreement or disagreement is going to be with regards to this proposed 2% value added tax. How much of a test is this going to be for this GNU, for there to be some sort of agreement, whatever it may be, but most importantly, putting the needs of the citizens first?
Yes, this is such an important existential moment for the government of national unity, for this national coalition government, and at provincial levels to some extent as well. But nationally, it's so important that the ANC can play a proper role and lead as a responsible party, as a party that recognizes that it relies on its coalition partners and makes clear how it will operate going ahead on those fronts where there is need for improvement of consensual, consultative, respectful behavior to their coalition partners. If that can follow on the yesterday's budget moment, then I think the coalition government could be much strengthened moving ahead. And it was, in terms of the budget itself, it could probably even have been, we'll see the evidence as we move forward, but have been a moment of strengthening of the budget and of critical interventions into the South African economy. As such, the ANC itself could also benefit from it because, in a way, this was a wind tunnel, a test run for budget proposals. The ANC can see now exactly how badly it would have gone off to bring in some of these proposals. I think they are under a renewed impression now that they seriously have to find alternative sources of public finance to finance their essential programs. And they have had a preview now as to how essential constituencies would have responded, and will respond if these exact proposals remain. So I think they would really do well for themselves and for the country, especially if they can step back and find new, better solutions.
Prof. Booysen, I've just got 1.5 minutes. Was this just democracy exercising its importance in a modern world today where even the word democracy is sometimes undervalued? Your view on that?
Yes, I think we should take it in our stride. It is really a case of democracy in action, and so many countries in the world have coalition governments, and coalition governments jointly bring a broader form of accountability and responsiveness to citizen needs, as long as the parties remain sensitive and in touch. And so I really think this can advance democracy. We should take it in our stride. Democracies are not easy, smooth runs all of the way, especially not coalition governments. And I really think we can see this level of accountability, how it's being strengthened, not just in Parliament, but also we South Africans can have the assurance that there is intra-cabinet accountability that is being exercised. And yesterday was the evidence.
Professor Susan Booysen, thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
That's Professor Susan Booysen, governance expert, just breaking down for us this being a test for how coalition governments work, or is this something out of the norm? Well, the next 3 weeks is going to give us an idea of whether this GNU can find middle ground with regards to value-added tax. All we know is that any hike on VAT will hit every South African, especially those who are living from hand to mouth. That's all we have for you here on News in Focus. From myself, Ross Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.